So I'm going to begin this video with the hit piece that was done by Matt Lauer against Tom Cruise. For Tom Cruise honestly and rationally explaining his concerns with antidepressant medications and psychiatric medications in general, and his concern for Brooke Shields, and how Matt Lauer is trying to basically put words in his mouth and change the context of the conversation. Now, Tom Cruise is actually excellent at staying on point. What's funny is Tom Cruise has actually become one of my favorite people because of his ability to stay on point, be reasonable, be rational, and I see how badly the media tries to attack him when he does what he does, which is tell the truth. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with telling the truth. But let's see what Matt Lauer has to say here.
Coming up, the mood changes a bit. You're going to see a fiery Tom Cruise talk about his attack on Brooke Shields, antidepressant.
Now, what you have to understand, he didn't attack Brooke Shields. They're trying to make it sound like this horrible thing. It was not an attack.
And Ritalin for kids.
I've never agreed with psychiatry, ever. Before I was a Scientologist, I never agreed with psychiatry. And then when I started studying the history of psychiatry, I started realizing more and more why I didn't agree with psychiatry. And as far as the Brooke Shields thing is, look, you gotta understand, I really care about Brooke Shields. I think here's a wonderful and talented woman. And I want to see her do well. And I know that psychiatry is a pseudoscience.
Now, you see, people are going to try and say, oh, but psychiatry is accepted by the medical community, yada, yada, yada. I will show you that it has been determined that psychiatry is meaningless, scientifically speaking, and medically speaking. Okay? Nobody's really getting any better from the psychiatric treatments. I think we all know that, especially people that have worked in the field.
Psychiatry is a pseudoscience.
But Thomas, she said that this particular thing helped her feel better, whether it was the antidepressant or going to a counselor or a psychiatrist. Isn't that enough?
Now, I want you to understand what he's saying there. He's saying this particular thing helped her feel better. Well, okay, cocaine makes people feel better. Marijuana makes people feel better. Alcohol makes people feel better, particularly if they're addicts. Okay? Junk food makes people feel better. Okay? Does this mean we should encourage people to do whatever makes them feel better, regardless of the impact that it's going to have on their health? Does that sound like the responsible thing as a society to do?
This particular thing helped her feel better, whether it was the antidepressant or going to a counselor or a psychiatrist. Isn't that enough?
Matt, you have to understand this. Here we are today, where I talk out against drugs and psychiatric abuses of electric shocking people, okay, against their will, of drugging children with them not knowing the effects of these drugs. Do you know what Adderall is? Do you know?
Now think about that. How in the world is a child going to receive informed consent? And assuming that their abilities to perceive reality and all this have been affected by poor parenting, you're going to allow the parent to have informed consent? And even if that were possible, the doctors rarely actually do make the person aware of the effects of the drugs, all of the effects of the drugs, and it would be impossible if you ever see these handouts and things like that. And they're not naming alternatives to the drugging, are they? They're not saying that there's these nutrients and exercise and all. And people are like, well, that's not, no, that is proven. Certain nutrients, I've made numerous videos about that. Certain nutrients, phytonutrients, vitamins, minerals, okay, exercise, These things are all effective with things like ADHD. These things are all effective with things like depression. Okay? We know this. We know this.
Their will of drugging children with them not knowing the effects of these drugs. Do you know what Adderall is? Do you know Ritalin? Do you know now that Ritalin is a street drug? Do you understand that?
The difference is this was not against her will, though.
Madam,
This wasn't against
asking you a
her will.
question. Madam, asking you a question.
I understand there's abuse of all of these things.
No, you see, here's the problem. You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do.
Aren't there examples, and might not Brooke Shields be an example of someone who benefited from one of those drugs?
All it does is mask the problem, Matt. And if you understand the history of it, it masks the problem. That's what it does. That's all it does. You're not getting to the reason why. There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance.
So postpartum depression to you is kind of a little psychological gobbledygook?
No, I did not say that.
I'm just asking, what would you call it?
Matt, that is the post. Now you're talking about two different things.
But that's what she went on the antidepressant for.
But what happens, the antidepressant, all it does is mask the problem. There's ways of vitamins and through exercise and various things. I'm not saying that isn't real. That's not what I'm saying. That's an alteration of what I'm saying. I'm saying that drugs aren't the answer. That these drugs are very dangerous. They're mind-altering drugs. And there are ways of doing it without that, so that we don't end up in a brave new world. The thing that I'm saying about Brooke is that there's misinformation, okay? And she doesn't understand the history of psychiatry. She doesn't understand in the same way that you don't understand it, man.
Do you examine the possibility that these things do work for some people? That yes, there are abuses, and yes, maybe they've gone too far in certain areas. Maybe there are too many kids on Ritalin. Maybe electric shock is...
kids on Ritalin, Matt.
I'm just saying, but aren't there examples where it works?
Matt, you're glib. You don't even know what Ritalin is. If you start talking about chemical imbalance, you have to evaluate and read the research papers on how they came up with these theories, Matt. Okay? That's what I've done. And you go and you say, where's the medical test? Where's the blood test that says how much Ritalin you're supposed to get?
It's very impressive to listen to you, because clearly you've done the homework and you know the subject.
And you should. And you should do that also.
Now, that's what I like about what Tom Cruise is doing there. He's explaining to this guy, you should do your homework. You should understand why I believe these things that I believe. He's not tearing the guy down. He's explaining that his problem is a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding. Okay? And that's the problem. That's the problem the general public has. That's the problem, believe it or not, a lot of psychiatrists have. And with the psychiatrists, it even goes to the level of a cognitive dissonance where they really do believe they're helping people. I worked with psychiatrists. I don't think I worked with a single psychiatrist that I would consider a bad person. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, they don't understand the damage they're doing to people, not because of a lack of knowledge, but because of they're mentally ill themselves. They have a cognitive dissonance of how they're harming people.
Clearly you've done the homework and you know the subject.
And you should. And you should do that also, because just knowing people who are on Ritalin isn't enough. You should be a little bit more responsible in knowing.
I'm not prescribing Ritalin, Tom, and I'm not asking anyone else to do it.
Well, you are. You're saying no.
So this is the thing. He's claiming that he doesn't have to be responsible because he's not prescribing Ritalin. This gentleman is a reporter. People take what he says as fact. So if he's going to say things that are going to be taken as fact, the minimum he can do as far as public service is concerned is to present facts that are facts. Okay? And that's where the responsibility comes in. He's saying that these things are safe and effective. Well, he needs to do his homework. He needs to understand what he's saying, and he needs to take the responsibility to understand that he needs to know the facts and present the facts as the facts. It's his minimum service to the public that he could possibly do.
There are some people who seem to have been helpful.
But this is a very important issue.
I couldn't agree more.
And you know what? And you're here on the Today Show,
right?
And to talk about it in a way of saying, well, isn't it okay, and being reasonable about it when you don't know, and I do. I think that you should be a little bit more responsible in knowing what it is, because you communicate to people.
But you're all
Matt,
in the end all.
Matt, but here's the point. What is an ideal scene in life? Okay. Ideal scene is someone not having to take antipsychotic drugs.
I would agree.
Okay, so now you look at it and you go, okay, a departure from that ideal scene is someone taking drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you go, okay, what is the theory and the science behind that justifies that? Look, if I want to know something, I go and find out, because I don't talk about things that I don't understand. I'll say, you know what, I'm not so sure about that. I'll go find more information about it, so I can come to an opinion based on the information that I have.
You're so passionate about it. And
I'm passionate about learning. I'm passionate about life, Matt.
He's saying you're so passionate about that. Everybody should be passionate about this because it affects everyone and everyone they know. So this is an interview with Peter Gorsuch, and he has a website, Deadly Medicines. Okay, I would recommend visiting his website. He also has a book called Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma Has Corrupted Healthcare. Okay, so let's hear what Peter Gorsuch has to say here.
It is very clear that the diagnostic system we have in psychiatry, for example, the DSM system invented in America, is very unscientific. Actually, to such a degree that the National Institute of Mental Health has declared that they will not use these definitions in research any longer. They are a disaster, and these definitions have become so broad, helped by the drug industry, that many totally normal people could easily get a psychiatric diagnosis. I can give you one example. Recently, I lectured for 100 people with all sorts of background, but what was common for them was that they tried to help psychiatric patients. So some of them were psychologists, and some were social workers, and so on. And then I tried 3 commonly used tests on them, one for mania, one for depression, and one for adult ADHD. They got so many diagnoses that up to half of them got at least one.
Could you speak a little bit about the idea that we sometimes read in the media that mental illness is underdiagnosed?
This is, what can I say apart from laughing when you say that psychiatrists say that mental illness is underdiagnosed? We have an incredible overdiagnosis problem. And of course, you can find some people who are not diagnosed and who would benefit from psychological help. Psychotherapy works for depression, for ADHD. It works even for schizophrenia. This is really what we should be doing instead of drugs. But that's not what they're thinking of. When they say the population is underdiagnosed, they always think of their horrible drugs and not of psychotherapy.
So this is from the journal Neuroscience. Okay, so what do we know? We know that psychiatric diagnosis is meaningless. Okay, so this is from the University of Liverpool. A new study published in Psychiatry Research has concluded that psychiatric diagnoses are scientifically worthless as tools to identify discrete mental health disorders. The study meaning if the person is not blatantly mentally disturbed, that these diagnoses don't really help too much. And very few people are blatantly mentally disturbed. People like me, for example, like I have a lot of internal issues, okay? But I present well, okay? I have PTSD, but I present well. People don't know I have PTSD until something happens, or until I've been in psychotherapy for a while, until I'm discussing things with somebody, until I'm being open and honest with somebody. They don't know, because I purposely present well. Most people have to present well. They don't do it. They're not necessarily lying. Like with me, you can't go around acting like a lunatic. It's just not, you can't do that, okay? So the study led by researchers, so what I'm saying is people need to present well, and this is why psychiatric diagnoses are so worthless, okay? Now, do I believe PTSD is a real thing? No. But I do know that I have symptoms that are on that DSM thing that match their word that they use, PTSD. Now, what does that mean? That means that I have these symptoms. Do I know what's causing these symptoms? Unfortunately, no. And the reason why is there hasn't been honest help given to me. I have had some success in being treated with autonomic dysfunction, but that's by a cardiologist. That's not by a psychiatrist, not by a social worker. Okay, that's by a cardiologist. Okay, but that's only helping some of my more pronounced physical symptoms. That's not helping the existential issues and things of that nature. Okay, and that's the problem. Okay, the problem is that not only what I would argue, not only is psychiatric diagnosis worthless, but the psychotherapies presented, and I have shown that, they're unproven and don't work. That's the biggest problem. What really helps, and I've shown research on this before, is the person-to-person connection between the therapist and the client, regardless of the therapeutic mode being used. So, diagnostic manuals such as the DSM were created to provide common diagnostic language for mental health professionals and attempt to provide a definitive list of mental health problems, including their symptoms. Okay? Now, what I would explain here is that the symptoms are not being caused by the mental health problems. The symptoms are the problem. That's the problem. What's causing those symptoms is numerous. And the problem is by them not, and this is the thing, I had literally debilitating autonomic dysfunction where I couldn't stand up, I'd fall over, I'd get heart palpitations. I spent 3 years vomiting several times a day, and I was told that that was a sign of that was my bipolar disorder. Okay? Which at the time I wasn't even diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So, this is the irresponsibility, and that was by my general practitioner, who I thought was a decent doctor, and I still think she's a decent doctor. But this is the kind of stuff where they can't find what they're looking at, so they'll just chalk it up to psychiatric diagnosis. Okay? 3 years I spent with debilitating heart palpitations, vomiting, falling down, dizziness. And I was told it was psychiatric issues. Blood pressure shooting up to the 200s over the 100s and 20s. Okay? And I'm told this is my bipolar disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. Okay? This is the problem, is these psychiatric diagnoses are not just scientifically worthless, but they're being used to gaslight patients and to keep them from receiving the medical treatments they need to parse out what is psychiatric, what is behavioral, and what is physiological. So the main findings of the research were psychiatric diagnoses all use different decision-making rules. They're not consistent. There is a huge amount of overlap in symptoms between diagnoses, meaning the diagnoses, like I've said, these are not real things. These are philosophical constructs, ideological constructs, okay? These are not real. These are social constructs, okay? These are not things that can be argued in reality. You can argue them with rhetoric, but there's no metric. Almost all diagnoses mask the role of trauma and adverse events. I would say yes. The problem is they also mask the role of brain damage. They mask the role of heart disease. They mask the role of neurological conditions, autoimmune conditions, dehydration, diabetes. They mask the role of many other physical factors, malnutrition, lead toxicity, heavy metal toxicity. Okay, diagnoses tell us little about the individual patient and what treatment they need. And that's the problem. If you're going to a psychiatrist, you are most likely not getting the treatment that you need to get well. Okay? The authors, that's the real problem. The real problem, the psychiatric medications and all that's secondary. The real problem is that people are not getting the medical help that they need to get well. That's the real problem. And beyond that problem, they're being treated with neurotoxins against their will that exasperate issues. The authors conclude that diagnostic labeling represents a disingenuous categorical system. So it's disingenuous. Lead researcher, Dr. Kate Alsop, University of Liverpool, said, although diagnostic labelings create the illusion of an explanation, they are scientifically meaningless and create stigma and prejudice. So keep that in mind. These are scientifically meaningless, and I would state they're also medically meaningless, and unfortunately are keeping people from getting the help they need to get well. And that's all for this video and this video series.